Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into a really compelling source. It forces us to look critically at, the intersection of rhetoric, power, and international conflict.
Yeah, it's quite a piece.
Our focus for this deep dive is an article titled Trump's Dangerous Rhetoric, A Call for Conscience. Now, it's important we say this up front, this article. It has a very strong, very distinct viewpoint.
Definitely.
Our mission here isn't about endorsing its conclusions, not at all. We're here to rigorously unpack its arguments, the vivid metaphors it uses, and the stark warnings it presents so you can fully grasp where the author's coming from.
Exactly. We want to carefully distill the core insights, help you understand how the author sees language, especially from powerful figures shaping and, well, potentially escalating global tension.
We'll just guide you through their perspective,
Well, yeah.
laying out the ideas clearly,
Yeah.
impartially.
That's the goal.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So where does the author start?
Well, they waste no time. Right away, there's this deep skepticism towards alarmism, toward what they specifically call war propaganda. And they point out how, historically, ruling classes, whether it's the U.S. or the Soviet Union, have often, exaggerated threats, created this climate of fear.
Usually for their own benefit, the article argues.
Precisely, for
Yeah.
strategic gain.
And the author really hammers this home, right? That governments frequently use fear, could be nuclear threats, could be foreign enemies, basically, as a tool
for control.
Yes, to control their populations. The source is pretty blunt. Maybe a nuclear apocalypse isn't happening tomorrow, but the talk about it, the rhetoric,
That's what's dangerous.
in their view, absolutely.
Yeah.
The language itself is presented as the immediate threat.
That's a really strong point about manipulating fear. And from there, the article jumps almost immediately to its most striking analogy. It's one that really makes you pause.
The shotgun analogy.
Yeah, likening Donald Trump's conduct to that of a 5-year-old with a loaded shotgun. Of course, the author quickly adds the crucial context. It's exponentially more dangerous because he actually has authority over military force. They even pull specific quotes attributed to Trump, like, "You don't know what I'm going to do. Nobody knows what I'm going to do."
It's quite the comparison. You can tell the author is deeply disturbed by what they see as Trump's, well, almost casual and unpredictable way of discussing military strikes, mass violence.
Glib is the word they seem to imply.
Yes, glib. The source really focuses on what it calls the psychopathy of treating potential mass death like it's just a game or, a business negotiation.
Total detachment from the human cost, according to the author.
Exactly. That's the core of the critique there.
And to ground this critique, the article then brings in a specific event, a recent Israeli attack on Iran.
Okay.
And the source states this attack was justified using these long-standing, largely unsubstantiated claims that Iran is getting close to having nuclear weapons.
Right. And this is where the author introduces a really key counter-argument. They cite U.S. intelligence sources, specifically mentioning Tulsi Gabbard by name, claiming that Iran does not have nuclear weapons and isn't actively trying to build them. So the article essentially frames Israel's preemptive strike as based on, well, falsehoods.
With the U.S. being complicit.
Deeply complicit,
Yeah.
according to the source, through funding and providing weapons to Israel. The author doesn't mince words here, calls the ruling classes in all these countries power-happy bastards.
Strong language.
Very. And makes the point very clearly that it's ordinary people who suffer the consequences.
So after laying out that geopolitical situation, the article really zooms back in on Trump's character. Paints him as, and this is a direct quote, a pathological liar,
Okay.
obsessed with self-importance, taking credit no matter what the facts are. The source even highlights this claim attributed to Trump, that Iran could have avoided devastation if they'd just come to him earlier.
Despite negotiations already happening.
Exactly. The article explicitly says talks were ongoing. It's presented as, well, quite divorced from reality.
It is quite chilling, isn't it, the way the author portrays it? What they really seem to focus on is this apparent indifference, Trump's indifference to the suffering, the deaths.
Yeah.
The source points to remarks about casualties that seem flippant and this reduction of war to just being about personal glory. It's clearly meant to make the reader think hard.
Definitely provocative. And from that very specific critique of Trump, the author then pulls the lens back again,
Yeah.
looking at American attitudes more broadly.
How so?
They draw this really pointed comparison between death to America, chants you might hear in Iran, and calls from some Americans to just level Iran.
Wow. Okay.
The suggestion is that both stem from a similar place, what the author calls ignorant herd mentality, patriotism. It's an uncomfortable parallel to draw.
It really is. Makes you reflect. The source is pretty emphatic here, insisting both the U.S. and Israel are acting like bullies. And then it makes this incredibly provocative claim
Who's one?
that the U.S. military-industrial complex, its whole global network, is effectively the largest terrorist operation in the world. That's the author's framing.
That's a huge assertion.
Massive. And then, to illustrate the mindset, they use another powerful analogy, comparing foreign policy to domestic law enforcement. Specifically, Waco.
The siege in the 90s.
Exactly, where, authorities justified a violent raid based on the possibility of illegal weapons inside. The author argues the U.S. justifies attacking Iran based on alleged intentions, what Iran might do, rather than concrete, immediate threats.
Exposing hypocrisy, in the author's view.
Precisely. The hypocrisy of heavily armed states using imagined threats to justify their own aggression. That's the argument.
That domestic parallel of the Waco one, it really does make you think about the double standards the author is highlighting.
It's designed to.
And this line of argument leads the article to equate Trump's mentality, as they see it, with historical dictators, warning that this willingness to attack based on lies or for personal gain or class interest.
That's the hallmark of tyrants.
Yes. And it leads directly to atrocity. That's the warning.
And it forces us, the readers, or maybe the public in general, to think about our own role. The source talks about public complicity.
How so? Enabling.
Enabling, yeah. Whether it comes from denial or just ignorance or maybe willful blindness, that's what allows leaders like this to operate, the article argues. And the author even raises the unsettling prospect of false flag operations.
To justify more war.
Exactly. They actually reference Operation Northwoods, that declassified plan from the 60s, where parts of the U.S. government considered staging attacks on Americans to blame Cuba.
It sounds incredible, but it was a real proposal.
It was. So the author sees these historical precedents, and there's this sort of plea in the article for someone inside the system to step up, to show some conscience and stop these escalations.
A call for a whistleblower, almost.
In a sense, yeah. The article ends on a really somber note, criticizing the American public for, in the author's view, not recognizing the dangers of this kind of authoritarian power, and expresses real worry about a catastrophic conflict.
Wow. Okay, so after going through all that, what does this all mean for you listening right now? How does this deep dive into such a, let's face it, strongly opinionated source help you maybe understand the role rhetoric plays in world affairs? Does it encourage you to evaluate information more critically, especially on these really sensitive topics?
Yeah, I mean, what stands out from the author's analysis, boiling it down, is this potent mix. When you have immense military power combined with what the author sees as unchecked ego and a real lack of empathy in a leader.
The danger skyrockets.
That's the argument. And it also forces us to look at how public denial, or just looking away, can essentially enable terrible things. That idea, too, that preemptive war can be justified with a mindset so similar to certain policing tactics.
The Waco analogy again.
Right. That's a profound point the author makes. And ultimately, the source suggests that state power itself, when it's detached from morality, from truth, is inherently dangerous. So thinking about all that, what aspect of this author's take on rhetoric and power really stands out to you?
That was definitely a deep dive into a provocative source. It certainly didn't pull any punches with its critiques, those analogies, the warnings about power, and importantly, about public complicity.
And it really leaves us with a critical question, doesn't it? Given how powerful language is and how wildly different the perspectives can be on things like international conflict, what responsibility do we have as individuals?
To do what specifically?
To really engage critically with the information we get, to question the justifications offered for conflict?
Absolutely. A crucial question.
Yeah.
We definitely encourage you to continue your own deep dives into these complex issues. Always try to seek out multiple perspectives and, form your own well-informed conclusions. Thanks for joining us.